Hello everyone, welcome to yours and my favorite part of the week. That's right, it is your online general psychology course, and I'm here to walk you through the hottest topics in consciousness. Now we kind of got past some of the heavy lifting, the bio, the stats, the methods, and now we can really jump into some specific psychological constructs. Of course, as stated, beginning with consciousness. So we're going to kind of walk through sleep and then talk about drugs. So the effects of drugs, why people do drugs, as well as some kind of fun stuff like hypnosis, for example. All right, so with that said, let's jump into it. As always, we will begin with definitions, because as stated, all sciences, including psychology, always debate the definition of terms, but we need a definition for, to study consciousness in this class. So let's start with a operational definition, it's called. All right, so consciousness describes our awareness of internal and external stimuli. Internal stimuli can include feeling pain, hunger, thirst, sleepiness, and being aware of our thoughts and emotions. External stimuli include seeing the light from the sun, feeling the warmth of a room, and hearing the voice of a friend. Consciousness should be viewed as a continuum that ranges from full awareness to deep sleep. So we have two types of stimuli, and consciousness refers to our awareness of said stimuli, with internal stimuli consisting of kind of internal states, like hunger, stuff I already reviewed, versus external stimuli, which is things that are external to the self. So the sun, the wind, people talking to us, stuff like that. And then consciousness should be viewed as not as an either or, that is a dichotomy, but rather a continuum that is, we can have a full awareness all the way to deep sleep and all kinds of little different variations of consciousness in between. And I want to touch on alien abductions. Research shows most, quote, abductees report a history of sleep paralysis, state of being unable to move just before falling asleep or right before waking up. It's often associated with feeling anxiety or terror, feeling vibrations, hearing humming, or sensing a menacing presence in the room. Sleep paralysis is one example of an alteration of normal consciousness. So again, this kind of goes back to that previous point wherein consciousness ranges between full awareness and kind of deep sleep. And here you kind of see something, not exactly in between, but, within that continuum. So we have kind of this sleep paralysis wherein we're unable to move, but we kind of have some consciousness. We're kind of aware of our surroundings. But kind of not to a full extent. And during this period, during sleep paralysis, people report that this is generally associated, as stated, with the feelings of alien abductions or seeing aliens. And what the thought process here is, what research suggests, is that kind of this being in this state of sleep paralysis, again, wherein you're unable to move, you're awake but not fully awake, so you have some sensations, but you don't have kind of a full awareness of what's going on around you. You're kind of, you're biologically kind of not fully awake, and we'll talk about what that means shortly. And thus, you're kind of in this weird, kind of in-between state. So you kind of feel like you're awake, you're kind of seeing things, almost in like a dream state. You're unable to move, which this kind of combination contributes to people seeing and reporting seeing, alien abductions or some kind of monster coming to get them. Now let's jump into some meat and potatoes of sleep, beginning with the circadian rhythm. Our circadian rhythms are cyclical changes that occur on roughly a 24-hour basis. It's a biological process like hormone release, body temperature changes, and drowsiness. Our brain's biological clock. It's regulated by neurons in the hypothalamus and triggers our sense of fatigue via increasing melatonin. So throughout the day, we have kind of shifts in our body temperature, our levels of drowsiness, and this is associated with hormone, a specific hormone release, and one specifically is melatonin, which is released, or the cycle in which that is released begins at the hypothalamus, and that triggers kind of our sense of feeling very tired. So kind of as we go, as the day progresses, we kind of, roughly stated, build a kind of like melatonin, and which kind of acts as a catalyst for us to fall asleep. Now, interestingly, you can buy melatonin in stores, but in general, kind of a new study actually just came out that that says that melatonin is kind of like really like bad for you. And actually, there's kind of an increase in children kind of overdosing on melatonin and dying from them. So be very careful with who you're administering melatonin to and how much melatonin you're taking, because in general, it's a risky drug. And like all of these kind of natural drug things that you can buy at the pharmacy, they're not really they're not regulated basically by the FDA. They don't have kind of the same standard of regulation as other drugs do, and thus you can buy a bunch of stuff that can be really unhealthy for you, and in some cases, as stated, fatal in the cases of children overdoses on melatonin. So just be aware, just because something's in the shelf does not mean that it's this well-regulated, not harmful substance. So the question then is, how much sleep do we need? In general, in the United States, newborns get around 16 hours of sleep per day, college students about 9, and most people ranging from 7 to 10 hours of sleep. Now, interestingly, there are some people in the world, and less than 1%, so a very, very small fraction of people, with this specific genetic mutation called DEC2, which allows these individuals to sleep less than 6 hours a day and not experience fatigue. Let's talk about sleep deprivation. Disruptions of circadian rhythms from things like jet lag, working late shifts, moving, can cause numerous health problems. Building up a sleep debt, that is a few nights of sleep deprivation, can have numerous negative consequences, such as weight gain, and diabetes and obesity could be linked to America's chronic sleep deprivation, depression, increased risk for cardiovascular problems, decreased immune system. There's a racial and class dimension, and can require at least several nights of sleeping a few extra hours to pay off. So sleeping is biologically important. We're not exactly sure why we sleep, and we'll talk about that later on in the lecture. But we understand that not sleeping is associated with numerous physical health risk, mental health risk, and just feeling bad throughout the day. Why I say there's a racial and class dimension to it, because we understand that stress, for example, is associated with not sleeping. So you would expect people who are poorer, worried about the world around them. They experience just kind of more stressors on a daily basis, and of course, this is also this is correlated with race, because racial minorities are overrepresented in poor populations and are more likely to live in kind of crowdy, noisy areas, which may lessen the likelihood of completing a full night of sleep. And thus, we know in general that the lower class you are, and racial minorities, and I should say, have shorter lifespans and just really more health problems than higher class people and non-racial minorities. And this is kind of, you can, kind of a sidebar here, not that's it on. You can always see kind of the intercorrelation of all these factors. So when you talk about why certain racial minorities, certain sexual minorities, the poor in general, the working class have worse health indicators, you'll see that all these risk factors are generally associated or within those populations. They're just kind of exposed to more traumatic events and kind of things that disrupt or place them at risk for worse health outcomes, in this case, sleep deprivation. I want to talk about cross-cultural differences in sleep and kind of historical trends in sleep. So a common refrain from many in industrialized countries is to sleep for 8 hours straight. That's meant to be the ideal sleeping behavior, but is that really the case? This concept actually did not emerge until relatively recently, with the advent of electric lighting. Before electric lighting, people's sleeping cycles had two phases. First, people went to sleep a little after sunset. Then they woke up in the middle of the night, during which they engaged in some leisurely activities such as socializing, snacking, playing music, and having sex. They then slept for a few hours again until around dawn. Sleeping patterns have been identified in subsistence societies and has been found when people are kept in a room that is dark for 14 hours a day. So it's really important to keep in mind that, the concept or the invention of like electricity in the home really changed how sleep cycles work, because just literally just darken your house at a certain period of time, and that is going to affect when you're going to go to sleep, because you literally can't do anything else. Outside is dark, inside is dark. Well, just go to sleep, and then your sleep cycle may be differently. You're not going to sleep 8 hours straight, as stated. Historically, that is not the case, and we see that in subsistence societies. And what I mean by that is kind of like, you can imagine, just general kind of tribal societies, kind of hunter-gatherer societies, and thus kind of less affected by kind of modern technology, have different sleep patterns than kind of individuals within industrialized societies. They actually have kind of similar sleep patterns as kind of those historical examples, because they do not have electric lighting. They are kind of a tribal, sometimes nomadic, but kind of hunter-gatherer societies. So kind of that kind of representing maybe representing evidence of kind of different differences in sleep across cultures, and kind of maybe more traditional forms of sleeping, because again, as stated, they have been exposed to less technology and just have kind of less technology in their lives. Interestingly, cultural practices affect not only the pattern of sleep, that is 8 hours straight versus not 8 hours of sleep, but also the amount of sleep that people get. The graph shows how even infants and toddlers already demonstrate cultural differences in how much they sleep in a day. Differences that are mostly reflected by adults in their cultures as well. Japanese infants sleep about 1.5 hours less than North American infants. Dutch infants sleep 1.3 hours more than American infants. Part of this may be explained by different cultures having different theories and expectations about sleep, something that will require further study. So we have different kind of sleep patterns across the world, which again, kind of as stated, may reflect different goals for sleeping and what people kind of expect for their workday, how much fatigue they're supposed to feel, or kind of how much work they participate during the weekday or their workday. Different societies kind of work more or less than other societies. And this may be reflected in these kind of the amount of sleep that particular cultures receive. Now let's talk about the stages of sleep. We recycle through 5 stages of sleep in 90-minute cycles. There are 5 stages. Stages 1 through 4 are non-REM sleep. There are no eye movements, and there are fewer dreams during non-REM sleep. Stage 5, REM sleep, is where you have kind of vivid dreams, and there are rapid eye movements, which is what REM stands for. Now let's walk through some of these stages. Stage 1, which is about 5 to 10 minutes per cycle, it consists of theta waves, hypnagogic imagery, scrambled, bizarre, dreamlike images that fit in and out of consciousness, myoclonic jerks, sudden jerks as if we are startled or falling. Stage 2, 10 to 30 minute cycles. There's sleep spindles, sudden intense bursts of electrical activity, K complexes, sharp rise and fall of waves first appear on EEG, only appear when we are asleep, as much as 65% of total sleep. All right, so let's walk through some of these. So as you can see with these waves here, so one way that we understand if a person is sleeping or not sleeping and what stage they're sleeping in is their electrical kind of activity, the brain waves that they are producing is associated with specific stages of sleep. And you can see this on the right-hand side for yourself, kind of what the different electrical activity in the brain looks like during particular stages of sleep. So if someone's faking sleeping, you can tell through EEG technology. Now I want to point out this hypnagogic imagery and myoclonic jerks, and we kind of all experience this, right? So like you're kind of almost kind of sleeping a little bit, but then you have that sudden jerk and you wake up a little bit. You kind of had a little kind of weird dream-like states. You're kind of in and out of consciousness. You're probably in stage 1 versus kind of stage 2. You kind of really see the spike in activity in the brain. And again, you can see this on the figure to the right-hand side. And actually, we spend about 65% of our total sleep in this stage of sleep. And it's important to note before we go through the rest of the stages that you just don't go through these stages one time. You go through these stages multiple times while you're sleeping. So kind of combining stage 3 and 4 here, this is about 15 to 30 minute cycles. They consist of delta waves. It is crucial to feel rested. It is suppressed by alcohol. 40% of sleep in children and 25% of sleep in adults are in stages 3 and 4. Stage 5, REM sleep, is about 10 to 20 minute cycles. The brain activity is similar to wakefulness. It becomes longer as the night goes on. It's about 20 to 25% of sleep. You dream more in REM sleep than in other stages, and REM periods in the early morning typically last longer, 30 to 45 minutes versus 10 to 20 minutes. So kind of the crucial points here, looking at stage 3 and 4, alcohol. So one reason why you feel very tired, or one hypothesized reason why you feel very tired after drinking a lot, getting drunk or whatever, is that alcohol is thought to suppress kind of delta waves and kind of stages 3 and 4 sleep kind of more generally. And thus, kind of this stage, which is crucial to feeling well rested, is suppressed by alcohol, and thus you wake up kind of feeling not refreshed and still tired, because even though you slept, you aren't either in this cycle long enough, or it's kind of like suppressing neurological activity, those delta waves during stages 3 and 4. And then we have stage 5, and kind of the big main points here. So this is really where your dreaming happens. Your dreams do happen in other stages, but disproportionately happens in REM sleep. And the amount of time you spend in REM sleep changes. So as you get closer to waking up, your REM cycles are longer. So if you ever feel something like, oh man, I feel like I've been dreaming for like 30, 40 minutes, like you dream for a long time, it wasn't like this 30-second dream, it's probably because you literally were dreaming for 30, 45 minutes in a particular dream. And most likely, those longer dreams are more likely to take place as earlier in the morning as you get closer to waking up, as stated, because the REM cycles get longer throughout the night. Now, REM sleep has been referred to as paradoxical sleep. That is because our bodies are paralyzed, but our brains are active. REM rebound occurs when we don't rest well for several nights in a row. The amount and intensity of REM sleep increases during REM rebound. It suggests that REM serves a critical biological function. The function of the eye movements is unknown. Each individual, even individuals who are blind from birth, engage in eye movements during REM sleep. The muscles in the middle ear are also active, can relate to us hearing during dreams. REM-deprived rats typically die within a few weeks. So let's walk through this a little bit. So as stated, during REM sleep, our bodies are paralyzed, but our brains are very active, which may represent kind of our increased dreaming during this stage. Now, interestingly, when you're not, when you're undersleeping, or when you're not getting enough REM stages of sleep several days in a row, your body will respond to that and try and actually increase the amount of REM sleep and even the intensity of REM sleep, which suggests that kind of adaptation, that response to being underslept or having sleep deprivation, and then having a sudden burst of longer and intense REM stages during sleep, suggests that REM sleep is very important to us. There has to be a biological reason why our body says, shit, I haven't received enough REM sleep for 3 days in a row. I'm going hard on REM tonight. I'm gonna have a lot more REM sleep because I need it to survive. So it's serving some kind of biological critical function. Now, interestingly, if you pick up someone's eyelid during REM sleep, for example, you'll see their eyes moving back and forth. We're not exactly sure what the point of that is at this point. Also, as stated, the middle ear is active during REM sleep, which kind of suggests that ear, kind of a neurological activity associated with kind of ear activation, associated with kind of actually hearing in your dreams. So kind of why the dream is so vivid, auditorily vivid. Maybe that's what I'm going for. But just being able to hear things during sleep is what I'm going for. Now, interestingly, in animal models, so you can basically, the point of animal models is basically to say, okay, our brains aren't exactly the same as these other animals, but they have some kind of similar features. So let's go ahead and do some tests on them and see what happens. And that can inform us about how critical something is. So in this case, what researchers did was say, okay, rats, you're not going to get any REM sleep. And then we're going to see what happens. And what happens is the rats die. So therefore, again, suggesting that, oh, You need REM sleep to survive. It's serving some kind of critical biological function. Let's move on to lucid dreaming. Sleep and wake may not be as distinct as once thought. Brain imaging studies have found increased cerebral cortex activities, which is associated with evaluating thoughts, feelings, self-perception, planning, which we talked about in previous chapters. EEG studies have concluded that this is kind of a hybrid state of consciousness. Lucid dreaming occurs when you know that a dream is a dream, possible to remain asleep, yet self-aware. Some report being able to control dreams may help with nightmares. Using brain imaging, researchers recently discovered that when participants experience a lucid dream, parts of the cerebral cortex associated with self-perceptions and evaluating thoughts and feelings rev up with activity. So we have neuroimaging studies kind of supporting the idea of lucid dreaming kind of being this hybrid state of consciousness. And if you haven't experienced lucid dreaming, basically you know during lucid dreaming, you know that you are dreaming. You have some kind of self-awareness, and some people report being able to control dreams. And me personally, I actually have had it, I think, like twice, 2 or 3 times, something along those lines. It was this weird dream that I was in a castle, and we kept getting invaded somehow, and we would lose every war, and then we would all get killed. But eventually, I dreamed it again, and then I said, wait a second, why don't I just go out this back door here, and then we can flank the invading army, and we'll win, or something along those lines. I said to myself, oh wait, I'm actually dreaming. I remember that I'm about to die if we let this invading army attack us, so let me sneak out the back door. So kind of that awareness that you're dreaming, and then being able, in some cases, kind of control the outcomes of your dream. And again, this kind of hybrid state of consciousness, self-awareness, yet dreaming is supported by neuroimaging studies. Let's talk about some sleep disorders, beginning with insomnia. About 30 to 50% of the population experiences sleep disorders at some point. The most common is insomnia. About 9 to 15% of people report experiencing insomnia. It consists of difficult going to sleep, staying asleep, or early waking. High rates in conjunction with depression, pain, medical conditions. Working late, jet lag, caffeine, illness, stress, and relationship problems, I should say. So kind of anyone who's struggle to go to sleep at night knows it's incredibly frustrating. And in this case, kind of insomnia, having a disorder, just being unable to consistently fall asleep or stay asleep or wake up early. And this is associated with traveling, so kind of jet lag. Anybody who's traveled across multiple time zones know that your brain has a biological sequence that's used to that time zone. So you go to a new time zone, your biological clock is now inconsistent with like the clock that's used in that time zone, and then trouble occurs. Eventually you adjust, but there is an adjustment period. But also here in insomnia, it can be related to too much caffeine or illness. So you have a lot of chronic pain, for example, when you can't sleep, or kind of just, again, general stress in your workplace, your spousal relationship, your girlfriend, boyfriend, your workplace. I don't remember if I said workplace already, but just kind of the general world. So kind of those social variables contributing to a higher likelihood of insomnia, which is not great because, as stated, sleep serves a critical biological function. Moving on to narcolepsy and sleep apnea. Narcolepsy is the rapid and unexpected onset of sleep. Some can also experience cataplexy as well, which is a complete loss of muscle tone. It's normal in REM sleep, but in narcolepsy, people remain alert. They plummet into REM sleep immediately versus normally about an hour after a sleep onset for people who do not have narcolepsy. It's thought to be due to a lack of production of orexin production, and there are drugs to mimic the hormone. Sleep apnea is caused by the blockage of the airways during sleep. One visible sign, or auditory sign I should say, is snoring. May wake briefly hundreds of times per night, causing fatigue and other health problems. So narcolepsy, kind of being stated, kind of a sudden, quick, unexpected falling asleep, but entering that REM stage almost immediately, basically. And unlike people who don't have narcolepsy, they're actually kind of much more aware of their surroundings. they're much more alert. So they're in this REM sleep. They can't control it. They can't move because, as stated, during REM sleep, your body does not allow you to move. But in this case, they're far more aware of it, which can be dangerous to that person. Just randomly fall asleep, for example. Crossing the street, for example. As stated, it's thought to be related to this oroxin production, which is a neuropeptide. It's kind of like a neurotransmitter. We talked about that in the previous chapter. And because thus drugs are designed to kind of mimic that hormone to kind of try and increase the production of oroxin to try and decrease narcolepsy. And then we have sleep apnea, which interestingly, so they'll wake up, sometimes hundreds of times per night, but they're not aware that they're waking up that many times. So they'll feel like, oh, I slept 8 hours, but I feel like shit, I'm super tired. And that's because, again, they're waking up hundreds of times per night. And one visible sign of this is that, or one auditory sign of this is snoring. And to the right, you can see one device designed to kind of help clear the blockage of air that people are breathing. I should say, help people breathe better during sleep. And kind of reduce the symptoms of sleep apnea. Moving on to night terrors in sleepwalking. Night terrors are sudden waking episodes characterized by screaming, perspiring, and confusion, followed by a return to a deep sleep. It's most common in children, but however, despite it being quite jarring at times to see, you can just watch them on YouTube. They're typically harmless. It occasionally happens to adults when under intense stress. Sleepwalking. Acts like a fully awake person but clumsy. Not acting out dreams because always occurs during non-REM sleep or REM sleep, stage 3 or 4. Occurs in 15 to 30% of children and about 3 to 5% of adults. So we have this night terror, kind of this very, terrifying, kind of a sleeping disorder where a person's screaming, sweating, they're confused. And obviously parents can be very concerned watching their children kind of go through this. And interestingly, kind of as going back to previous points, that kind of our social world impacts our biological functions, in this case sleep. So kind of experiencing intense stress, we're just really feeling bad about the world, we're really feeling bad about ourselves, rent's too high, can't pay for it, etc. Just intense amount of stress can increase the likelihood of night terrors. And sleepwalking, I really just want to point out that they're really not acting out their dreams in general because, again, sleepwalking occurs during stage 3 and 4, where, and we, as covered, dreams in general occur or are more likely to occur during REM sleep. But the question is, why do we dream? We're unsure exactly why we dream, but it's involved in processing emotional memories, integrating new experiences with established memories, learning new strategies and ways of doing things, simulating threatening events so we can better cope with them in everyday life, reorganizing and consolidating memories. People for thousands of years have attempted to decipher the meaning of dreams. So, just kind of swat through some of these. The idea is that dreams and sleeping in general are thought to be, I should say, studies have found a lack of sleep associated as stated with physical and psychological problems, but also a decrease in memory. So thus kind of sleeping kind of is thought to serve this kind of cognitive necessary function that allows us to remember things, kind of refresh our brain and kind of allow a process in which our synapses, the connections between our neurons is strengthened during sleep. So it's thought to play, again, this critical biological role. But it's also, dreaming specifically, thought to kind of allow you to practice kind of scenarios in the real world. So maybe how to cope with something in the real world, maybe being confronted with a similar scenario that's stressing you out in the real world, and then your dream self can kind of interact with that, and then you can wake up and say, aha, oh, maybe I should take this different approach. So kind of a different way to evaluate the world, and kind of consequently have a different perspective of how to emotionally evaluate the world. So there's kind of famous studies of athletes, for example, like golfers or whatever, kind of imagining themselves like golfing, like putting or whatever, and then just kind of imagining it over and over again, and kind of really just like simulating in this dream state scenarios that they're going to encounter in the real world, and thus allow them kind of to simulate strategies that they can use in the real world, in that case golfing. Now moving on to specific theories, Freud's theory, the protection theory. He argued that dreams transform our sexual and aggressive instincts into symbols that represent wish fulfillment, how we wish things could be. During sleep, our mental sensors, that is our ego, is less able to repress our instincts. Dreams require interpretation to reveal their true meaning. Dreams consist of two types of contents. Manifest content, which is details of the dream itself, and latent content, the hidden meaning of the dream. So basically, Freud is arguing, and as I stated before, anytime the quiz question is, this theorist is arguing something is related to sex, it's going to be Freud. So basically, Freud is arguing that kind of in our dreams, are kind of transforming our sexual and aggressive desires that we kind of suppress in the real world. In dream world, those kind of sexual and aggressive kind of instincts and desires are now allowed to kind of just freely manifest themselves, appear in our dreams. However, the manifestation of those instincts are kind of abstract. So therefore, our dreams are kind of a series of symbols that represent these unconscious sexual and aggressive instincts and desires. So we kind of have two parts of a dream. We have the manifest content, which is the details of the dream itself. So imagine, okay, so I had a dream that I was like picking up a trombone over and over again for some reason. There's trombones all over my room, and I don't know, I'm just picking them up for whatever reason. So that's kind of the details of the dream. Well, the latent content would be a person who's kind of a psychotherapist or a Freudian influenced kind of theorist would say, okay, but that trombone represents this unconscious desire you have for wanting to beat the hell out of musicians for whatever reasons. So you got your actual content, and then you have that interpretation of that manifest content, which is called latent content. And what Freud did and his other theorists was they would say that, okay, I'm specially trained in how to translate manifest content, those trombones, into latent content, that is wanting to beat the shit out of musicians. So they kind of proclaim that they're experts in that translational process. And thus you go to these therapists, and then they tell you what your dream is really about. Some arguments against Freud's theory: it's difficult to falsify. We have very few sexual dreams, about less than 10%. There are straightforward dream content, and post-trauma nightmares. You can change nightmares with psychotherapy, write down new dreams, and rehearse it. So kind of to walk through these, it's difficult to falsify. What I mean by falsify is, if you going back to our chapter 1-2, the idea here is that in science you have to be able to, or using the scientific method requires you being able to find evidence that suggests, that disproves kind of the theory, or at least suggests that the theory needs to be modified. So how can so say Freud is doing my, interpreting my trombone dream, how do I falsify that? How do I go about proving and finding evidence that Freud is incorrect in that interpretation? It's kind of very difficult to do so, because we just have basically competing interpretation of the latent and manifest contents of our dream. So how do we go about, it's very difficult to go about systematically critiquing Freud's theory, because a lot of it is kind of this subjective interpretation, not really subject to the scientific method. As stated, Freud is very, kind of everything is sex-rooted, a very sex-oriented kind of researcher, but in general, research suggests that most of our dreams, the supermajority of them, are not sexual-oriented. We also have straightforward dreams, so not everything needs a, interpretation. So going back to that golf example, a golfer dreaming about golf, kind of a straightforward interpretation, at least on the surface level it is. And for the purpose of this class, kind of the last bullet point is just referring to that people can kind of change their nightmares to maybe decrease the likelihood of having nightmares while being awake by writing down and rehearsing dreams during therapy sessions, which kind of suggests that people can control their dreams, their future dreams, to some extent, even in a dream state. So going back to Freud's theory, he's basically arguing that you can't do so because your parts of you that kind of regulate and stop those aggressive and sexual instincts are not active during dreams. Therefore, you can't control it, and thus you're having all these weird dreams that he has to interpret. But this here is kind of demonstrating, or kind of supports the idea that no, actually kind of what we do while awake kind of does affect our dreams, and thus we do have some control over our dream state. Our next theory, activation synthesis theory, AST. And these theorists argue that dreams reflect the brain's attempt to make sense of random and internally generated neural signals during REM sleep. These signals originate in the pons and move to the forebrain. During the day, neurotransmitters change continuously. REM is turned on, that is, REM sleep begins by an increase in acetylcholine, or ACH. It activates nerve cells in the pons. Serotonin and norepinephrine are shut down. Those are different kinds of neurotransmitters. Decreases reflective thought, reasoning, attention, and memory. The forebrain does its best to cobble together signals into meaningful stories, synthesis. So kind of the idea here is that they're arguing that dreams are just random kind of neurological signals. And they argue because during the day and during sleep, certain amounts of neurotransmitters change. So in that, so specifically ACH increases, which begins REM sleep, and at the same time, kind of serotonin and norepinephrine are decreased. And serotonin and norepinephrine is associated with reasoning, attention, memory. So our reasoning, our attention, our memory is going down. Our REM sleep is going up. Thus, we're increasing the amount of dreams. Therefore, we have all these dreams, and we have a lessened ability to reason and reflect on what is going on. So basically, we have all these neurological signals going on, or activating, while at the same time our thinking and our reasoning is going down. Thus, these neurological signals that make up our dreams, that neurological activity to make up our dreams, are incoherent. They're not based in any reason or attention or reflective thoughts. They're just random signals. We can't interpret them, and they're based on nothing. Because again, serotonin, norepinephrine neurotransmitters are down. Therefore, thoughts associated with those kind of reflective thoughts are down, while REM sleep is up, O2 ACH activating. So therefore, our brain is kind of trying to make sense of this. And dreams are basically, I should say, our brain trying to make sense of this random, completely random, incoherent information. Next, the neurocognitive theory of dreaming. Dreams are meaningful products of our cognitive capacities and achievements, which shape what we dream about. There's a parallel development of visual imagination and advanced cognitive abilities. This is why adults' dreams are more complex than those of children. Children recall less, or I should say fewer dreams than adults when woken up during REM sleep, 20% versus 70%. Until 10 years old, dreams are simple, less emotional, and bizarre. Dreams are typically ordinary or dramatize our concerns and reflect the non-randomness of dreams. 50 to 80% of people report recurrent dreams, like missing a test over many years. Yet dreams can take on a life of their own. So basically what these neurocognitive scientists are arguing, that dreams kind of reflect our brain's growth. So as you kind of develop your cognitive capacity to kind of reason, take other people's perspective, have a better understanding of the world, imagine the perspective of other people, kind of play around with cognitive concepts in your head, so kind of have imagination. All these things, these cognitive advancements that occur during development are kind of are argued to be associated with why adults dream more. So if you have, or dream more complex, I should say. So if you have the neurological, the cognitive capacity to think in complex ways, that it gives you the capacity to dream in complex ways. So because children cannot do so, their dreams are going to be very simple, like, oh, I went to the zoo or something along those lines. And they're less likely to recall their dreams. So as stated, if you wake up an adult, or 70% of adults, if you ask them what they were dreaming about, if you wake them up during REM sleep, they'll recall what they were dreaming about, versus only 20% of children will recall what they were dreaming about if they're woken up during REM sleeps. These theorists also argue that dreams are not just completely random, because we often dream about things that are actually occurring in our real world. And often we dream about the same thing over and over again. So relationship problem, or the classic, oh shit, I forgot to turn in a test. And those kind of dreams can occur over and over and over again. So basically they argue that even though dreams can get out of hand, and kind of just be wild things that would not happen in the real world, or not really who you are, dreams that also represent, again, kind of cognitive achievements and relate to some circumstances in our real world. Or I should say, kind of the world we experience when we're awake. Moving on to hallucinations. Hallucinations can be defined as realistic perceptual experiences in the absence of external stimuli. So basically in English, all that means is that you perceive something is happening to you, but there is no actual thing happening to you. It's the absence of the external stimuli, but you perceive an experience. So the brain activates in the same way for hallucinations as for, quote, real sensory experiences. When people report visual hallucinations, for example, their visual cortex is more active. It underscores the link between perception and brain activity. A misconception that hallucinations only occurs in psychologically disturbed individuals. However, 10 to 35% of people report having experienced at least one. Differences exist. Auditory hallucinations in psychotic individuals are more negative and perceived as less controllable. Some non-Western cultures, including some in Africa, value hallucinations as gifts of wisdom from the gods and incorporate them into their religious rituals. People in these societies may even go out of their way to induce hallucinations by means of prayer, fasting, and hallucinogenic drugs. So I already reviewed kind of hallucinations, but kind of interestingly, so when people report seeing a visual hallucination, they actually, and you put them in a neural imaging scanner, something like fMRI, for example, there is similar neurological activity. So in the case of their experiencing a visual hallucination, parts of their brain kind of associated with visual processing or visual experiences activate similarly to actually seeing something. So again, kind of tying the individual's perceptions to their individual neurological activities. And as stated, it's a misconception that hallucinations only occur to psychotic people, with as much as 1/3 of people experiencing one in their lives. Now, but there are differences, as stated. So for psychotic individuals, they're more likely to feel that their hallucinations are beyond their control and more intrusive, and more negative. So more likely to be violent, uncontrollable, versus other people who do not, or I should say non-psychotic individuals who feel their hallucinations are less negatives. And you can actually see this in kind of cross-cultural examples, where in indigenous tribes, African tribes, or just kind of some, not just tribes, but kind of just societies in general, viewing hallucinations as kind of connection to whatever their spiritual beliefs are, and go out of their way kind of to do things to increase the likelihood of experiencing hallucination, because it's positive. It's not as kind of, a gift from some deity or connection to their ancestors, for example. So you can see differences between how hallucinations are interpreted, kind of if you have a disorder versus someone who doesn't have a disorder, or people, groups across cultures. Out-of-body experiences, or OBE, is a sense that our consciousness has left our body. When participants report they see or hear what's occurring at a distant place, the reports are generally inaccurate, or at best, a good guess when they're accurate. A scrambling of sensory information, not actually leaving the body, may be the reason. Our sense of self depends on our ability to integrate sensory information from different pathways into a unified single experience. Ketamine induces the feelings of a detachment from the physical world. It disrupts a unified sense of self and body by transmission of the neurotransmitter glutamate. Reminds us that one of the brain's greatest achievements is its ability to integrate sensory information from different pathways into a unified experience. So out-of-body experience, for people not familiar, is kind of this idea that your like consciousness, spirit, whatever, however you define it, kind of leaves your body, and you're basically just floating above, and you can see your body and, you know, whatever, the room around you. But research on people who report that they are experiencing out-of-body experiences does not support this. So they'll say, okay, you're experiencing an out-of-body experience. Okay, what is in the room around us? What is in this room right now? And they don't do any better than chance in general. One belief, so one kind of explanation of out-of-body experiences is that really, if you think about it, our brain is constantly taking in all kinds of information. There's auditory information all around you. You feel touch. You also you have visual information all around you. So you're taking in, you know, just an infinite amount of stimuli at all times that your brain has to process, take in. And kind of, while at the same time understanding that you are a self, that you exist as a distinct entity, as a physical, like, separate entity from kind of like the world around you. So you have all this information, all these objects, just infinite amount of brain sensory information coming at you, trying to be processed while understanding and then integrated into yourself while understanding that, like, you exist. So that very complex phenomenon of putting all that information together, while still having a quote-unquote, you know, unified self, is thought to be interrupted during out-of-body experiences. Thus, you kind of lose your sense of self, that you are like, that your perception is, you know, attached basically to your body. And one way that you can test this is through ketamine, which is thought to, or is associated with feelings of kind of detachments from the physical world, like floating above yourself, you know, again, kind of leaving your body and having this out-of-body experience. And one reason is to do this is kind of do interruption of neurotransmitter glutamate, but kind of the idea here is that specifically you can kind of use these drugs to kind of simulate out-of-body experiences. And again, speaks to how much information your brain is constantly processing, and when you interrupt those complex processes, you know, crazy things can occur at a kind of perceptual level. Near-death experiences are out-of-body experiences reported by people who've nearly died or thought they were going to die. Kind of the typical cliche is going through the tunnel towards the light. However, interestingly, this differs cross-culturally, that is near-death experiences, in response to expectations about the afterlife. So people from Christian and Buddhist cultures frequently report the sensation of moving through a tunnel. But native people in North America, the Pacific Islands, and Australians rarely do. It may result from, or I should say, near-death experiences may result from the massive release of endorphins in a dying brain, and the buzzing and ringing and other unusual sounds may be the rumblings of the oxygen-starved brain. So we have these out-of-body experiences, and interestingly, depending on what culture you are and kind of your expectations about life, death, your afterlife, gods, non-gods, whatever, impact the type of out-of-body experiences that a person feels. So kind of suggesting that there's kind of a social element here. There's a, in this case, a cross-cultural social element, or a cultural social element, wherein your expectations about the afterlife, again, and in life, influence the types of things that you perceive to see during these near-death experiences. Scientists believe that near-death experiences result from kind of just a massive release of endorphins in the brain, and at the same time, kind of your brain kind of losing oxygen, and thus kind of, or I should say, thus in concert, kind of the feelings that creates the feeling and sounds of buzzing and seeing things that, you know, are actually visible to people who aren't going through this near-death experience. Moving on to mystical experiences. Mystical experiences involve a sense of unity or oneness with the world. It's a transcendence of time, space. You lose your sense of self, but feel joy, peace, wonder, awe. It's difficult to put into words. It's often religious in nature and can be induced via fasting, seizures, prayer, or hallucinogenic drugs. Christians often describe mystical experience in terms of an awe-inspiring merging with God's presence, while Buddhists, whose spiritual practices focus more on achieving personal enlightenment than worship of a specific deity, often describe mystical experiences in terms of bliss and kind of a selfless peace. Psilocybin versus placebo, and psilocybin basically is fungi drugs, mushrooms, basically common understanding. It's a hallucinogenic drug that affects serotonin receptors. It's the active ingredient in mushrooms. Researchers had participants take the drug, then report experiences 14 months later. 58% reported that their number one symptom was experiencing a mystical experience, which was higher than the groups of participants who received the placebo. 31% reported negative short-term reactions, such as some fear and paranoia. People who injected psilocybin also reported increases in their ability to be open to experience. So a mystical experience is kind of this transcendent, I am one with nature. I am the trees, I am the mountain, I am whatever. It's a loss of self, but like a connection to, whatever, the universe, nature, and, inherent in this is kind of either religious or spiritual or kind of like a oneness. So it can be non-secular. Or I should say, it could be secular. So kind of just a general oneness with the world around you. And as stated, there's cross-cultural differences in how people define those mystical experiences, with Christians, who obviously believe in kind of a single God, reporting kind of merging with God's presence, versus Buddhists, who are really not focused on a worship of a particular deity, reporting kind of feeling a sense of bliss and more of that oneness with kind of nature and the world around them. As stated, scientists have kind of measured mystical experiences and their link between drugs, and specifically giving participants mushrooms or giving participants a placebo, again, which is basically no drug. We talked about that. And what the researchers found, that participants who received the mushroom reported higher likelihood of experiencing this mystical experiences. And over time also reported kind of a more openness to experience, which is kind of associated with kind of feeling that sense of vulnerability, but also kind of connection to the world around you. And again, been there. Had actually this mountain in Colorado, which was a grind to get to. This entire lake was frozen. It was just a grind to get there. It was exhausted. Definitely not under any substances at the time. Didn't happen. Not a thing. Definitely not. And then when I reached that frozen mountain, or that frozen lake, and saw that mountain, I was like, dude, I am mountain right now. This is incredible. Complete emotional breakdown. Insane. So basically kind of that's experience. Again, I'm the nature, I am whatever. And depending on if you're religious, I'm the oneness with God or gods, etc. Hypnosis, a set of techniques that provides people with suggestions for alterations in perceptions, thoughts, feelings, and behavior. It uses the induction method, typically suggestions for relaxation, calmness, well-being, and instructors to imagine thinking about something pleasant. Based on reliable and valid scales, scientists have established that about 15 to 20% of people pass very few 0 to 3 out of 12 suggestions, while remaining 60 to 70% pass 5 to 8 suggestions, medium suggestibles. Widely used clinically to help treat pain, obesity, anxiety, and habit disorders, can help enhance cognitive behavioral therapies. There is, however, no evidence that hypnosis works by itself. In stage shows, the hypnotist carefully selects potential performers by observing how they respond to waking imaginative suggestions, which are highly correlated with how people respond to hypnotic suggestions. Those who flick away a suggested mosquito flying around their heads, for example, are likely to be invited on stage because they're probably highly suggestible to begin with. All right, so let's break this down. So kind of the point of hypnosis is kind of to suggest to somebody that you feel better, you feel calm, you feel relaxed, you feel pleasant. Researchers have looked and tried to categorize kind of the general population into how likely they are to being susceptible to those suggestions, feeling relaxed, calm, etc. And what researchers state, basically they ask them sets of questions, like 12 questions of how, and then based on these 12 questions and these 12 tasks, they rate how suggestible a person is. So how likely they are to be, for example, prone to being falling or being influenced by hypnosis. And in general, most people are either like average suggestible or not suggestible at all. So if I'm telling you you're getting whatever, you're getting sleepy, and you're just like, no, I'm not at all, whatever, dude. That's low suggestibles. They ain't having it. They don't care. Versus medium suggestibles who are like, I really did sleep like 4 hours last night. I guess I'm a little tired, but it's not because of you, dude. It's just other things are going on. It's not that real. And versus high suggestibles, which is about 15% of people who are like, well, you know what? Damn, you are making me sleepy right now. So there's people basically have predispositions to being suggestible. And what what researchers have argued is that how kind of those stage shows work is the person, hypnotist who's on stage and performing, what they'll do is they'll ask you to do various other random things like, okay, oh my God, look at this mosquito that's around. Oh, get rid of it. And then the crowd who's like freaking out and, waving their hands around to get rid of the mosquito, those people are going to be highly suggestible because they're into the show, they're motivated to be into the show, and they're listening to the hypnotist, saying there's a mosquito, versus a person who's like scrolling on their phone, they don't give a shit, like they don't care. People are like, yeah, whatever, man, I don't care. I'm not playing this game. I'm here to watch the show, but I'm not like playing with this fake mosquito. Someone like me. Those people are, so those kinds of two people, what the hypnotist will see on stage will still, obviously they're looking at the crowd, and what the hypnotist will do is call someone on stage who is reacting to those simulated mosquito example, for example. So they try and kind of select people who are highly suggestible and then bring them on stage because it's a better show and it kind of illustrates their magical powers, which obviously are not true. Now let's walk through some myths of hypnosis. It produces a trance state in which amazing things happen. This is not true. It doesn't turn people into mindless robots who are all of a sudden capable of doing anything. They're not going to all of a sudden, just start biting people, turn into a zombie, for example. It doesn't have a great impact on suggestibility. So kind of if you're already low suggestibility and you say, okay, you're a zombie, go out there and bite people, that person is not probably going to do that. Hypnotic phenomenon are unique. That's a myth. There is no biological difference between hypnosis and wakefulness. So you can put people in kind of EEG and fMRI equipment. And as we talked about with sleeping, you can tell when someone's sleeping and not sleeping based on kind of brain waves. So you can say, okay, hypnotist, make this person or perform hypnosis on this person, and then you can just kind of measure their brain activity. And studies have found that there are no biological difference between hypnosis and a state of wakefulness. That is, if you're quote unquote under hypnosis, you're still actually awake and alert. There's no biological difference. It is a sleep-like state, not biologically similar to sleep, kind of similar to myth 2. People are unaware of their surroundings. Most people are fully aware of their surroundings and what happened during hypnosis, and most people can recall background conversation during hypnosis. So again, you're not in this trance-like state. You're fully aware of what's going on around you, and you can recall people in the crowd, whispering or whatever. You recall the stimuli around you, which again suggests that you aren't asleep and you are aware of your surroundings. Myth 5. People forget what happens during hypnosis. It's rare and mostly limited to people who expect to have amnesia following hypnosis. And hypnosis enhances memory. It increases the amount of recall, but not much, and it's often inaccurate when it does. It does increase confidence by the eyewitnesses. However, it's often inaccurate, and most states have banned it. So myth 6, I want to talk about a little bit. So kind of the idea is, hypnotist comes into a courtroom. They then then say, okay, I'm going to hypnotize this eyewitness, and then I'm going to access their true memories and make them tell the truth about what happens. So what happens in general is that the eyewitness is like, oh, damn, I've been hypnotized. I feel really confident. But in general, that confidence is unfounded and can produce some very inaccurate recollections. And as a consequence, most states have banned it because then you end up jailing the wrong person. So we have all these myths about hypnosis, but what are some theories about why hypnosis does what it does? Well, the social cognitive theory has some ideas. It rejects the idea that hypnosis is a trance state or a unique state of consciousness. They argue that a person's approach to hypnosis is based on his or her attitudes, beliefs, and experiences with hypnosis. When participants are told that hypnotized people can resist suggestions, participants find themselves able to resist hypnosis. Whereas when participants are told that hypnotized people can resist suggestions by hypnotists, they are more likely to fail to resist hypnosis. Studies show that a training program that increases people's positive beliefs and expectancies about hypnosis and their willingness to imagine, along with suggestions, increases their ability to respond to hypnosis. About half of participants who initially scored at the lowest range of suggestibility tested at the top of range after training. These findings both challenge the idea that hypnotic suggestibility is a stable trait that can't be modified. So basically our takeaway message is here, these social cognitive theorists, so basically breaking down that word, socio, that means social, thus getting to people's ideas, their beliefs, their attitudes, their experiences towards hypnosis, and then cognitive, which is basically just thinking, so kind of your social expectations and thinking, impact how the suggestibility of people towards hypnosis. So in studies wherein participants are told, hey, listen, you can, during hypnosis, it's been clinically proven, you cannot resist, it's impossible, you're going to be hypnotized, you have no control. People who get told that by experimenters are more likely to find themselves unable to resist hypnosis, versus people who are told by experimenters, listen, hypnosis is bullshit, it's not real, you can resist anytime you like. Those people who receive those instructions are more likely to resist hypnosis. So kind of the idea here is that our expectations, our belief about hypnosis, contributing to kind of our feelings during quote-unquote hypnosis. And in training programs, wherein, you know, those week-long training programs wherein we're teaching people, hey, listen, hypnosis is real, it's real, it's real, thus kind of changing their expectations about hypnosis and their attitudes towards hypnosis, people who receive that training are more likely to kind of be suggestible during hypnosis. So kind of shifting that suggestibility of an individual would suggest that suggestibility can be kind of, again, changed by social expectations and beliefs and attitudes towards hypnosis. So kind of our beliefs contributing to our likelihood of kind of interacting with hypnosis or feeling something during quote-unquote being hypnotized, which demonstrates how our interpretation, our perceptions of things can literally impact our experiences with things. All right, let's talk about drugs. Let's light it up. 420. It's not 420 when I'm recording this, but I needed a segue. All right, so let's light up this slide. Legal and illegal drugs can cause large changes in our state of consciousness. Psychoactive drugs are substances that contain chemicals similar to those found naturally in our brains. Physical and psychological effects depend on the type of drug and the dosage, that is, how much of the drug you're taking. Also, mental settings, cultural heritage, and genetics play a role. Mental sets can be defined as beliefs and expectations about the effects of a drug. So going kind of back to hypnosis, so it's similar here. What you believe about a drug, what you expect to happen when you take a drug, impacts how you feel when you're taking the drug. Substance abuse disorders, defined as a recurrent and significant impairment or distress associated with one or more drugs. It's a relatively new diagnostic category that appeared in the 2013 edition of the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic Manual. It involves tolerance and withdrawal. Tolerance is more of a drug is needed to achieve intoxication. Withdrawal is flu-like physical symptoms when use is stopped or reduced. Alcohol withdrawal symptoms, for example, can range from insomnia and mild anxiety to more severe symptoms such as seizures, confusion, and bizarre visual hallucinations. So kind of straightforward here, but also kind of that 2013 edition, this new term, substance abuse disorder, really speaks to kind of the how science is always evolving. This disorder is relatively new. And I also just going to state, not really tested on, that there's a difference between physical dependence and addiction. Addiction, and it's widely debated, addiction kind of generally being associated with kind of behavioral problems. So kind of like you're taking the drug despite the social and behavioral consequences to you. So you're drinking and you're playing video games and then you're missing your job and then you get fired. So that's kind of versus kind of like that physical dependence that you're it kind of depends on the drug to kind of function. Not tested on, but kind of it's important not to mix up like addiction and physical dependence on drugs. Tolerance refers to, as stated, kind of a drug is needed to achieve intoxication. During time, your tolerance increases, thus kind of a tolerance break. So basically your brain adapts to the amount of drug in your body, and thus more and more drug over time is required for you to achieve a certain high. Speaking to your brain constantly kind of in a state of adaptation. But my addiction little caveat dovetails here into drug dependence. You can classify drug dependence into two types: physical dependence, which is drug use used to avoid withdrawal symptoms, and psychological dependence, where drug use is motivated by cravings even when drug use creates social problems. So psychological dependence being more closely related to kind of the traditional ways of that addiction is thought to be understood, wherein your kind of overwhelming need to have the drug kind of creates social problems in your life, maybe divorce, maybe you spend all your money on the drug, just numerous social consequences. Versus physical dependence, literally where you're just taking the drug to avoid those withdrawal symptoms, those flu-like symptoms, or even more severe symptoms. So really, at that point, you're really kind of not even enjoying the drug. You're just taking it to not have to feel, either just not have to feel anything, but not have to ever experience kind of those withdrawal symptoms. Some explanations for drug use. There are social, cultural influences and acceptance. Again, social, cultural, breaking it down, social and cultural. Cultural differences in attitudes towards a specific drug. Cultures or groups in which drinking is strictly prohibited, such as Muslims and or Mormons, exhibit low rates of alcoholism. Substance use disorder with tolerance and withdrawal symptoms. In Egypt, the annual rate of alcohol dependence is only about 0.2% of the population. In France and Italy, where they view drinking as a healthy part of daily life, the rates are considerably higher. That is the rates of drinking. Addictive personality. Predisposes someone to abusing drugs. However, there is no such thing, no single addictive personality profile. You will be tested on this. There is no such thing as a single addictive personality. No such thing. Not a thing. Okay? You will be tested on that. Okay? But, however, there are certain personality traits that influence the likelihood of using drugs. So someone who's more impulsive, maybe who has more anxiety, more open to experiencing novel and unique circumstances, is correlated with an increased likelihood of becoming abusing drugs. So kind of these specific traits, impulsivity, for example, not just associated with drug use, but maybe just I'm not gonna save money right now. Instead, I'm going to go out with my friends and party, or I'm going to go buy some new video game, something like that. So these kind of traits, they're associated with a lot of things, but in general, but additionally, it's thought to be correlated with an increased odds of abusing drugs. However, there is not a single personality. What I mean by that basically is, and we'll talk about this more in kind of later chapters, but there's not like that person has the personality of an addict. There is no kind of like uniform, universal personality set of traits that make a person addicted. And not only that, but because those impulsivity, anxiety, seeking out novel experiences are just correlations, it may actually be in the reverse direction. So what I mean is that impulsivity might not be that impulsivity increases the odds of addiction, but rather kind of abusing drugs increases the likelihood of impulsivity, of anxiety. So it's the opposite direction of a correlation, which we've talked about correlation since it's a challenge of correlations, is what is causing what. And probably there's some combination of the two, where an anxiety may make you more likely to abuse some drugs, but at the same time, doing some drugs may also increase that amount of anxiety you have, and thus kind of they reinforce each other. There's also a reinforcing self-medication cycle, relieve anxiety. So people are more likely to drink to relieve anxiety when they believe alcohol is a stress reducer. So again, if you believe that alcohol is going to help you, you're more likely to take that drug to medicate, to relieve that anxiety. And you also see this with like pain medication as well. I have a pain in my leg, but I also have a pain because I'm very stressed out about the world around me. So I'm going to self-medicate to reduce that pain in my life. Depressants, they depress the effects of the central nervous system. Alcohol and sedative hypnotics depress the effects of the central nervous system. It has two properties. It's sedative, that is, it exerts a calming effect, and it's hypnotic, that is, it exerts a sleep-inducing effect. Alcohol is the most widely used and abused drug in our society, which is a depressant. It has a stimulating effect at low doses, but a depressant effect at higher doses. That is, it's related to relaxation, elevated mood, increase of talkativeness, and lower inhibition. The feelings of alcohol intoxications depend largely on the rate of absorption of alcohol by the bloodstream, mostly due to stomach and intestines. More food in our stomach is associated with less quickly alcohol is absorbed by the bloodstream. Feel more drunk on an empty stomach. Switching types of alcohol, however, is not more likely to get you drunk. Females experience effects more heavily. Women will have a higher blood alcohol content than men. Women have less alcohol in their body and have more body fat. Alcohol isn't fat soluble. A woman whose weight equals that of a man and have consumed the same amount of alcohol will have a higher blood alcohol content level than a man will. So because intoxication feelings relate to how quickly alcohol is absorbed in our bloodstream through our stomach and our intestines. The amount of food in our stomach impacts how quickly the alcohol is absorbed into your bloodstream. So if you drink on an empty stomach, that's why you feel drunker quicker versus having eating. That's why it's suggested to eat before you drink, because it's kind of less stuff in your body that it has to go through because it has to be absorbed through the stomach. So your food can kind of soak up and kind of delay the onset of alcohol reaching your bloodstream. And as stated, females experience effects of alcohol more heavily. This is because women have less water in their body and more fat. However, alcohol isn't fat soluble. That is, it's not broken down by fat. So basically, the alcohol is kind of in their body, is being broken down at a decreased rate as compared to men. Thus, if a man and a woman drink the same amount of alcohol, the woman would be expected to have a higher blood alcohol content than the man. And you can see this on the right-hand screen, this chart. Culturally learned expectancies influence mood and complex social behaviors. Remarkably, participants who ingest a placebo drink mixed to taste just like alcohol display many of the same subjective effects of drunkenness as participants who ingest an actual alcoholic drink. Expectancies are often more important than the physiological effects of alcohol in influencing social behaviors. What we expect to happen when drinking also plays a role in social behavior. Aggression, excuse the flirt. Non-social behaviors, reaction time, for example, are more influenced by alcohol itself than expectations. The setting also has an effect. Participants tested in a bar or bar-like situation with drinking companions feel more friendly and elated when they drink and consume up to twice as much alcohol as participants who drink by themselves. So again, our expectations of the drug, in this case alcohol, impacts our experiences with the drug. So in that experiment wherein you give a placebo, alcoholic-like drink, that's something that tastes like alcohol but doesn't have alcohol in it, people will act drunk-like, or similar to drinking alcohol. And a classic example for me with this is in 7th grade when we take this field trip to the Keys, they served kind of like Sprite that kind of tasted a little alcoholic, but obviously it wasn't. But the classmates and were like, "Oh, this is actually alcoholic. They messed up," and then they were like acting like drunk. So kind of like your expectation of how the drug feels, in this case alcohol, kind of impacting your behavior. In this case, 7th graders thinking that their principal and their teachers gave them alcohol at whatever 13 years old in Key West. Again, this is kind of well, I should say another example of this is what you expect to happen. So if you believe that alcohol can help you flirt better, pick up guys or girls at a bar, or the opposite, make you more aggressive, you're more likely to experience those behaviors while drunk because you're expecting them to occur, and thus you're going to kind of look for circumstances wherein you can act that way, or you're going to interpret events in an aggressive or flirty way. Now, importantly, though, your expectations do not work across the board. So for physical behaviors, such as reaction time, hand-eye coordination, expectations play far less of a role, if any role. So just because I expect not to crash when I'm drinking and driving does not mean magically you can now drink and drive. It doesn't work like that. It's more of a behavioral kind of psychological effect, a social, and I should say social behavior kind of effect in the setting itself. So if you're drinking with friends, having a good time, you're more likely to report feelings of feeling happy while drinking, and you're more likely to drink more versus someone who is drinking alone, who may thus kind of feel much more lonely and kind of depressed. Depressive drug prescriptions, sedative hypnotics, often prescribed to assist with anxiety and insomnia. There are 3 classes: barbiturates, non-barbiturates, and benzodiazepines. Benzos, like Valium, are widely used and can be highly addictive. Mixing with alcohol can be fatal. So we suggest not doing that. What are stimulants? Increases the activity in the central nervous system, heart pressure, respiration, and blood pressure. So we had our depressants. Now we have our stimulants, which increases, it stimulates and increases activity. Nicotine from tobacco is the most widely used stimulant. It reaches the brain very fast, about 10 seconds after inhaling. It's highly addictive. It activates acetylcholine receptors, which again, speaking to all the different things that neurotransmitters are associated with, and thus how hard it is to create prescription drugs. Smokers often report feelings of stimulation, as well as relaxation and alertness. Moving on to cocaine. Cocaine comes from a shrub that grows in abundance in South America. By the late 1800s, doctors prescribed cocaine for a wide range of illnesses. Cocaine is a powerful natural stimulant. Users report euphoria, enhanced mental and physical capacity, and a decrease in hunger. 40% of people in the U.S. of adults, I should say, report using cocaine by 50 years old. Increases, and it's not the neurotransmitter-wise, it increases the activity of dopamine and serotonin. But obviously, if you buy cocaine randomly on the streets, there is often mixed with random shit that can potentially kill you. Crack cocaine. Concentrated doses of cocaine produced by dissolving cocaine in alkaline basic solution and boiling it. Until 2010, the sentencing disparity was 100 to 1, moved to 18 to 1 in 2010. So what I mean by that, if you're convicted for having cocaine, let's say you have the same amount of cocaine, one person has the same amount of crack cocaine as another person who has just pure cocaine. The disparity, and they get convicted by some judge or jury, whatever. What happened was that individuals who had crack cocaine had a massive sentencing disparity. So if convicted, it was 100 to 1. So for, say, I'm convicted for 1 month in prison because I have more natural powder cocaine. The same, the person who gets caught with crack cocaine has as a sentence conviction of 100 months. So it's 100 to 1 until 2010. Then it was changed to 18 to 1. So say I'm sentenced for 1 month in jail versus 18 months in jail. This is despite the fact that basically crack cocaine and typical like regular cocaine is basically chemically the exact same drug. And many researchers argue this sentencing disparity, despite the drug being exactly the same, is kind of rooted in classism and racism. Poor people and racial minorities are more likely to use crack cocaine. Thus, and those groups are traditionally disenfranchised by institutions. And so this is kind of argued to be kind of an example in which poor people and racial minorities are unjustly and disproportionately convicted, in this case through this sentencing disparity. Narcotics, drugs that relieve pain and induces sleep. Pleasurable effects are related to the 3 or 4 hours that the usual dose lasts. If people addicted to heroin don't take another dose within 4 to 6 hours, they experience withdrawal symptoms. Opioids consist of heroin, morphine, and codeine. 2% of U.S. adults reported having tried heroin. That was in 2015. Heroin is the most abused opioid, but addiction isn't inevitable with use. Often used medically, but can lead to abuse. Oxycontin, as we've seen with numerous overdoses and deaths from people who experience pains, physical pain and kind of social pain, overdosing on this drug, and becoming addicted and then dying. We see a huge trend in the U.S., especially the last 10, 12 years or so. I talk about this more detail in future courses. But also it's important to note that not everyone who uses any drug gets addicted. In general, in fact, most people who use drugs do not become addicted to the drug. But however, it can be dangerous due to mixing, as stated, mixing different drugs or getting kind of drugs that aren't what you think you're buying, or taking too much of a drug. Moving on to psychedelics. Hallucinogenic, produce dramatic alterations in perception, mood, and thought. Marijuana is most used illegal / kind of now legal drug in the United States. It's debated if it actually is hallucinogenic. Subjective effects due to marijuana is due to THC. Physiological effects include heart rate increase, red eyes, dry mouth. An analysis of long-term effects of use is ongoing because previously it was outlawed, and thus scientists cannot actually investigate the harms and benefits of the drug. But now that's more systematically being done now due to changes in the laws of weed. And finally, LSD. It was originally synthesized in 1938. The effects may stem from interference with serotonin. It's associated with brain areas with lots of dopamine receptors. It increases the communication among neural networks. Ecstasy, or MDMA, stimulant or hallucinogenic. It causes release of huge amounts of serotonin. It's related to some of the behavioral effects are self-confidence, well-being, and empathy. And interestingly, research on the effects of people with post-traumatic stress syndrome, OCD, and anxiety has found that it's not reliably associated with long-term anxiety, depression, suicidal behaviors, and psychosis. So actually, researchers at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, have really looked at the medicinal uses of LSD, ecstasy, and mushrooms. And the one article of mushrooms, the health benefits of mushrooms, is attached to the right-hand side. And they found that it was associated with kind of less antisocial criminal behavior. And a lot of research is being done with, as stated, for people who have PTSD, OCD, anxiety, seeing the kind of medical benefits, or testing the medical benefits of those specific drugs. And that is ongoing research. And I just want to include and close this lecture with this figure, which represents kind of crosstalk among brain networks that occurs after participants inject psilocybin, again mushrooms, right-hand side. That is not evident under ordinary circumstances after participants inject a placebo. So on the left-hand side, this is kind of visual illustrations of kind of like how much brain networks are communicating with each other. On the left side are participants given a placebo, and on the right side, participants receiving kind of mushrooms or different kind of hallucinogen, psilocybin, and you could see just the increased amount of neural network communication going on. And that could be related to the specific feelings of oneness, of that kind of mystical experience, what we talked about in the earlier slides, and kind of just general feelings associated when taking psilocybin. All right, so with that said, thank you so much, everyone. It's a little long, but I feel like a lot of this is very applicable and semi-interesting, more interesting than kind of just like hard bio kind of stuff, and maybe methods, unless you're kind of a method nerd, kind of like I am a little bit. But yeah, so hopefully this wasn't too boring. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it, and I will see you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.